You are the only version of yourself, right? When you woke up this morning, for example, it was only you who lifted yourself out of bed, and it was you sensing the floor under your feet. There was no one and nothing else sharing this particular set of sensations in that very moment. Based on this, we could say, this is an essential part of existence. Let's quickly go back 3.7 billion years to the first microbial life on Earth. These beings are alive in the sense that they are autonomous beings, actively maintaining their inner state. These early ancestors of us, however, lack any meaningful subjective experience of their existence. They just drift through the oceans and interact with whatever they bump into. Our first hominid ancestors, on the other hand, had a subjective experience that is more similar to the one we enjoy today. Their awareness of their autonomy and inner state makes them gather food when they are hungry, and get cozy with each other when they feel drawn to mate. But how does this lead you to experience yourself in this way? And is this experience an accurate window into reality, or is it just an illusion? At its most basic, the self-concept is a collection of beliefs one holds about oneself. It embodies the answer to the question, who am I? On the broadest level, self-concept is the way one thinks about and views his or her traits, beliefs, and purpose within the world. While it seems reasonable to think of yourself as having the same identity over time, the same can be said of the notion that there is no such thing as a constant you. Say we think of the self as a long, ever-developing chain consisting of different beliefs, memories, preferences, and physical attributes. While it may seem that your memories are not all that subject to change, think about your preferences. Do you still struggle to tie your shoes in the same way you did when you were a kid? Your priorities change throughout time as well. When you were young, you watched cartoons. Now you probably favor the news. Some elements of the chain that make up your identity fluctuate so frequently that the idea of a consistent you seems questionable. Your opinions change with new information, your mood with the weather, and your appetite with the food truck you just passed. All of these are valid versions of yourself. They are just not the same over time, and shaped and molded by our individual experiences. And this also makes everyone see themselves in a unique way. We all look at ourselves through our own subjective lens, that is formed based on our own personal experiences. For example, the way a Nicaraguan college student sees himself in the mirror is different from the way a Japanese child does. This subjective understanding of who we are, or just identity, is important to guide us. Your identity, for example, will help you decide if you want to go to college or just make YouTube videos instead. The understanding of who and what we are ultimately helps us to fulfill our needs, desires, and dreams. These in turn are means for us to maintain ourselves in a desirable state. In this sense, we are not so different from our single cellular ancestors, striving to maintain ourselves the best we can. What you commonly view as yourself is therefore just your own experience of what it means to be you. This view of what is you is ever changing and emphasizes one or another aspect of who you are at any moment. This realization transfers to the brain, where no single region can be matched one-to-one to the self. It rather arises from a complicated, interconnected web of neurons. Nevertheless, we have been able to approximate locations of important control centers for neurological tasks like vision, motor control, memory, or pleasure. An example for this is the disorder astigmatognosia, which can result from damage to certain areas in the right hemisphere. A patient suffering from this condition might live in neglect of his own arm or leg. While there is nothing broken or damaged within the limb, the mind of these patients cannot control it, or even accept it as part of the self. The disorder may extend to more abstract facets of someone's identity. Patients may be brought to their birthplace, but will always believe it is a replica, since they are not able to associate it with themselves. However, disorders like astigmatognosia can also show how our brain will go to great length to maintain a complete view of what is part of us. Even though the trauma suffered to the brain may leave permanent marks on a physical level, the psychological condition may not be permanent. The brain can find a way to recreate a practical image of who one is, by rewiring and channeling the subjective experience of an arm or a hometown into a different region of the brain. The brain will utilize the connections available to it to try and create a functional experience of the self. In the end, our brain will strive to model whatever it deems to be important. When the sky is grey, you will remember that time you got soaked, and take an umbrella before you leave the house. Models like these, simple or complicated, make you who you are. Your brain is made up of almost 170 billion neurons and glial cells that are collectively generating the model of who you are and the sense of self you are experiencing. Your complex cognition hence fascinatingly arises from the interaction of many less complex things. This property is called emergence, and though it's very prominent in the human brain, we can observe the phenomenon in other contexts as well. Think about a beehive. The bees all serve simple functions, like building honeycombs and tending to the offspring, but when they all work together for the same purpose, they keep the hive alive. Just like our brain, the hive is a complex entity, made up of many less complex parts, achieving tasks that far exceed the capabilities of the sum of each individual. In this sense, society is not so different, because you may look at yourself as a self with strict boundaries and you consider yourself to be autonomous, but in the grand scheme of things, you too are a less complex part in the fabric of an interwoven global society. And our societies are capable of achieving things that are far beyond the reach of any one individual. So we can ask ourselves the question: if the brain creates a conscious self out of billions of cells, does society create an unconscious self out of billions of humans? When you and I interact, my actions will inadvertently impact you and alter your sense of self. If, for example, I compliment your haircut, you will be a more confident version of yourself, and you will integrate the moment I complimented you, and thereby me, into your sense of self. When we humans interact, we will continuously leave these ripples of our own identity in the selves of others. Through your actions, you become part of your parents' sense of self, and your friends, and teachers, and they of yours. It is therefore very difficult for you to define who you are without thinking about the people who shaped you and who will shape you in the future. We will always derive our sense of self from who we are as a social being, and every interaction that you and I have will leave a mark of whatever made up yourself before this point, and will live in my identity and will be transferred onto others in the future. Imagine this one-on-one interaction occurring on the scale of 8 billion unique identities. All these constant interactions will lead to the spread and amplification of thoughts into global trends. Trends will grow into a common identity and slowly transform into global culture, and thereby change the selves that interact with this culture. Thereby, the impact of the selves of previous generations have an impact on how selves of current generations interact. For evolutionary reasons, we have been trained to operate under the belief that we are an autonomous entity. But just as we don't grant our neurons or microbial life real agency, we should be cautious to overstate the position of the human self. Rather, we should see it for what it is, a very complex network made of simple neurons, which in turn is a simple part of a highly complex society. In that sense, you, the Nicaraguan student, and the Japanese child are just pieces in a puzzle. Let's now think of ourselves not as puzzle pieces, but as neurons in a brain that is society. Perhaps this means that society itself has a higher consciousness that we might not be able to grasp. Should that make you feel small and insignificant? Far from it. The way you experience your surroundings is still the most valid way for you to experience the world you live in. This is what you are meant to feel, and this is the reality in which you can enjoy yourself. Is it not beautiful to know that you as an individual, with your own self-experience, are actively shaping the lives of millions of people? Is it not cool to know you leave a mark on something as grand as society every time you touch someone's life? Someone like you.